you, everybody. Just to continue our conversation, to move into, Laura, if you want to join us on the stage, that would be good. Appreciate it. Just to turn this conversation, we started with the Latino priorities in NHLA. This is another effort that we have also in Unity. It's called the National Latino Civic Engagement Table. It's an effort that started almost 4 years ago, and it's a space in which Latino organizations that work on civic engagement come together to share strategy, to share resources, to have our staff teams working on the ground together, to share strategies on the places in which we're going to be doing voter registration, the GLTV, voter education, etc. So it's really a space of unity and collaboration. And it has 3 different areas of focus. First is the field work that we do together. So together we plan the field work to see if LULAC is in the same space with LACLA in Orlando. We're knocking on the same doors. Let's do it in a more creative way and in a more strategic way instead of different spaces. So it's a space of unity. We continue with this table since last year, coordinating efforts in coming together. The organizations that are part of this table are fantastic organizations like LANEO, NCLR, LULAC, Hispanic Federation, LACLA, Mi Familia Vota, Voto Latino, and MANDEF. But before I start, I want to thank some friends that I see in the audience and some friends that help us get this space. I want to thank Stephen Easley from the Loser law firm, this space for opening the doors. I also see a friend over there that is eating a very beautiful sandwich, Celeste Carrasco from AT&T, for your support actually in both conventions to many Latino organizations. I also want to thank Southwest, and a space that also supports many of the organizations here at the table for both conventions. So thank you for the support. One of these Roberto Manzarate from Amgen, thank you. And if I forget anybody, just help me compliment everybody, but thank you. We're going to continue these efforts to DNC. Why don't we do this a little bit more relaxed, just speaking from our different chairs. And why don't we start with Arturo Vargas, our fantastic expert on the issue of Latino voters in the nation. You just had a space right now, Arturo. Why don't you start us on the general overview of where we are, some of the collaboration, and then we move forward with the rest of the panel.
Absolutely, thank you, Hector. And those of you who were with us this morning at the NALEL briefing that we did on the Latino vote, this is going to sound a little familiar because I'm going to repeat some of the information that I shared earlier this morning about the context for this election in terms of how many Latinos we anticipate will vote come November 8th. First thing to know is that our community continues to grow rapidly. We are now 55 million strong in the United States. That's 17% of the entire U.S. population. More importantly, that's about 25% of all of America's youth. And 44% of projected Latino voters are millennials. So the one thing to take away from this conversation is that Latinos are growing quickly as a population, they're growing quickly as an electorate, and they're very young. Second thing is to know that Latinos are also increasingly, overwhelmingly U.S. citizens. Yes, we have a strong immigrant background. A third of Latino adults are immigrants. 2/3, however, are U.S. born. And even more significantly, 94% of all Latinos in the United States under the age of 18 are U.S. born. And what is driving the growth of the Latino population today is natural increase, births over deaths, as opposed to immigration. We project that in November there will be 27.3 million Latinos eligible to vote. That's 4 million more Latinos that were eligible to vote the last time we had a presidential election. And so the components of that 4 million potential voter increase is significant when you look at how you break it down. About 3.2 million of them are Latinos who simply turned 18 years of age between 2012 and 2016. 1.2 million are Latinos, immigrants, who became U.S. citizens during this 4-year span. And 130,000 of them are Puerto Ricans who relocated from the island to the mainland. And then you had about 500,000 Latinos who passed away during this period of time. You have that net increase of 4 million more Latinos eligible to vote. So our projection is that 13.1 million Latinos at least will vote come November. And we base this projection on looking at the trends of previous elections, analyzing census data, statistical modeling the previous presidential elections to try to anticipate what the potential electorate could be in 2016. But this is based on demographic trends. It does not necessarily also incorporate environmental, political, campaign trends of other factors that may affect Latino voter turnout. So as we get closer to the election, we may have a revised figure, but we're seeing this as a floor of what the minimum number of Latinos will be that will vote. And that's a significant increase over the 9.7 million who voted the last time we had an open White House in 2008. 9.7 million voted in 2008. We're anticipating 13.1 in 2016. The 130,000 who are, the 1.3 million who are naturalized citizens, what's important about that segment of our growing electorate is that Latino immigrants who become citizens are more likely to register to vote and more likely to vote than Latinos who are born here. And so that's 1.3 million potential interested, engaged, new voters. States where Latinos can make a difference in statewide elections. Arizona, we anticipate over 400,000 Latinos will vote, 433,000. 3.8 million in California, 277,000 in Colorado, 1.7 million in Florida, and 194,000, nearly 200,000 in Nevada, over 2 million in the state of Texas. We know there are some factors that may contribute to the performance of Latinos, as I mentioned earlier today. The lack of a full-strength Voting Rights Act may potentially affect some Latinos from exercising their right to vote. And at NALEO, we're working very hard to ensure that Latinos have all the information and they need about being a protected voter. Ultimately, we believe that the most effective protected voter in terms of their voting rights is a well-informed voter. So we have made available our evergreen election hotline, 1-888-VE-VOTA. That's 888-839-8682. Anyone can call that number any month of the year, any day of the year, Monday through Friday, and receive information about the voting process, what the rules are in the particular states or jurisdictions to register to vote. If they already are registered to vote, many people don't know if they're registered or not. On election day, where the polling place is located, and also the opportunity to report any problems that anybody may encounter on election day. Let's say somebody shows up and they're told, oh, you're not registered to vote, when the voter believes he or she really is. They can call this number. We will be having partnerships with organizations of attorneys, including the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law and Latino Justice for ODEF, in terms of making sure that we can do some crisis management on election day to ensure that nobody's turned away from at least having the ability to cast a provisional ballot. So that's one component of our work. It's voter protection, to make sure that we make the franchise accessible to everybody else. The second major component of NALEO's election work is to work closely with our partners in Spanish language media to make sure that the voters who get their information in Spanish also receive messages about the importance of voting. But as we can see from the voting rates of naturalized citizens versus native born, which we would assume naturalized citizens more likely to receive their information in Spanish versus a native born who probably receive it in English, it's the naturalized, the Spanish language media consuming Latino that is actually more engaged in the political process. We certainly want to continue that. But what we need to do is to engage those who are not regular voters. And that's the third component of our work. We call that segment of our electorate the great unengaged. The 51% of Latino adult U.S. citizens who have never voted or consistently do not participate in elections. And over the past 6 years now, we've been doing research into what are the tactics, strategies, and messages to engage these consistent, persistent, non-participating Latinos into the electoral process. And it's hard work. This is the heavy lift. This is where our political system gets lazy. That if you're not registered to vote and you're not a regular voter, campaign and candidates dismiss you. Because they're going to use their campaign dollar to reach the voter who votes in every election. And if you don't vote consistently, you get ignored. And that's the system, that's the cycle of disengagement that we seek to break at the Naleo Educational Fund, to bring these unengaged Latino adult U.S. citizens into the voting process. And it's one that's hard work to do, in addition, because nobody wants to invest resources into that hard work. They want the short-term payoff of mobilizing Latinos for the election, and it's always simply about the next November. Well, we don't believe that this is about the next November. We believe it's about the next generation. And what we need to do is to create a fully engaged Latino electorate that participates, not because of a particular campaign, candidate, or circumstances in a particular election year, but because it's important for our community to have a full voice in our democracy.
Muchas gracias, Arturo, and thanks for constantly bringing attention to the issue of lack of funding. You've been a fantastic boy on the issue, and a number of us have been engaging on this discussion because it seems like everybody's talking about the Latino vote, but there is serious underinvestment when it comes to Latino civic participation. And anybody that is familiar with programs on the ground on civic participation, on voter education, on voter registration, we know how much it costs to put those programs together. And even though we have organizations like LULAC, like LATLA, like others that have an army of volunteers on the ground that complement our efforts, it's really important to make sure that there is serious funding or funding out there to make sure that we move this important issue forward. If you're okay with this, Arturo, maybe we can continue with your colleague Lara Manistani, the DC Office Director, to give us a more complete continuation of the overview that Naleo works on, and then we move on with the call.
Sure, and thank you again. It's always interesting to be on the same panel with my boss. But aside from the work that we're doing on the ground on the voting rights piece, we are actually one of the lead organizations working on it at the federal level. Arturo, during the beginning presentations, talked about our priorities within the NHLA policy agenda, which includes restoring the Voting Rights Act to give it full powers. In that sense, is going back on the Shelby decision, which eliminated a process that was in place that was key to ensuring that, well, trying to ensure that communities did not face discrimination or discriminative policies at the polls. Unfortunately, since the Shelby decision, and while the Shelby decision recognized that the process, the pre-clearance process, is still needed, they ruled that it was antiquated. And so we have been working with the Leadership Conference and a lot of our partner organizations in developing new legislation that would put in place an updated version of that pre-clearance process. What we've been seeing, of course, in Congress is that not much has been moving. And while the Voting Rights Act has traditionally been extremely bipartisan, we haven't been able to get it moving in Congress. So at Naleo this year, we have been exploring alternative routes to try and highlight the need for a Voting Rights Act. and also some of the problems facing our community. One of those, for example, is that we know that in the absence of the pre-clearance process, the Department of Justice is actually spending more money in litigating cases. So we don't have this initial process anymore where certain states that were found to be implementing discriminatory voting or processes that affect the voting, the administration of elections process, that now these states can just go ahead and pass whatever changes they want to make to that process without having to consult with the Department of Justice. That doesn't mean that the DOJ doesn't have tools. Unfortunately, the tool that they have is to go after each case individually and litigate, which is very costly. So through the appropriations process, we've been working with members of Congress from both sides of the aisle to ask the agency to put together a report on exactly how much it is costing them to do that. Aside from obviously working with our partners and continuing to emphasize the importance of passing a Voting Rights Act. And then on the more statewide piece, we are obviously continuing to look at what kinds, and not only looking at it, but also talking to our membership and elected officials across the nation about what kinds of practices they could be looking at implementing in their states that would make that process more accessible to Latinos. So one of the major areas that a lot of you might have been seeing that has been gaining traction is automatic voter registration policies. And NALEO has been at the forefront of working with several states, including California, in implementing these changes. So not only on the piece of, we think that this is a good policy that is going to help more Latinos become involved in the process, but also in cautioning within that process about unintended side effects, right? So trying to ensure that it's sound policies. And then that third piece in continuing to work with our elected officials to ensure that they understand that it's not only getting out the vote, it's also taking a look holistically at the kinds of policies in your state and in your local governments that could have a negative effect or that are not contributing to getting out the Latino vote. Simple things like, longer longer hours that the polls are open, time, longer periods for early voting, things like that. Very simple fixes that perhaps a lot of the community is not aware of that would promote that vote. So with that, like I said, we're looking to continue to partner with organizations like NHLA and other organizations out there to ensure that people understand that this next election is going to be the first election in 50 years without the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. And during the election season, we are going to have our voting rights protection hotline active, and we are going to be conducting an analysis to try and see, hopefully, that the effects are not as bad as we think they're going to be. But we will be coming back to our partners at that time and seeing what other steps we can continue to take to try to restore the VRA. So thank you.
Muchas gracias, Laura. Just move on. Kenneth, the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislators, it's an important space. You mind talking about, from your perspective, about the Latino vote and what you perceive is happening in the nation nowadays?
Certainly. I remember actually a few months ago I saw this documentary many of you may have seen called The Latin Explosion. It was on HBO. Not plugging you, but it was a fascinating piece on the contributions of the Hispanic community in the history of this nation. And it started with a very simple quote. It said that in 1950, 1 out of every 50 Americans was of Hispanic origin. By 2050, it will be 1 in 3. And I think it's no coincidence that HBO put out this documentary a few months before the election season, because they know what we know, and that is that Hispanics are not anymore, they're not just an influential vote, but rather a decisive vote in many states, and particularly you see that, for example, in Florida, with the influx of many Puerto Ricans moving from the island to Florida. So it's very important for us as a community to realize the importance of that vote and the power that comes with that vote. And I can give you a very specific example. The president of our organization is a representative from Pennsylvania. Until recently, he was the only legislator of Hispanic origin in the Pennsylvania legislature. That means that not only did he represent a very small neighborhood in northern Philly, he also had the weight of carrying the responsibility of taking care of 750,000 Latinos throughout the Keystone State. That is very important for us as a community to be aware of, because if, in the case of Pennsylvania, it could be anywhere else, if that person were not there, nobody would be looking after our interests as a community. And so it's very important that we as Hispanics support and encourage our own members to participate in the political process, to engage, whether it be at the grassroots level, trying to get out the vote within the Hispanic community, or actually having the courage to step up to the plate and running for office and representing our community. So I think this year in particular, you know, it's been said in the past that the Latino vote is, you know, this year is the year of the Latino vote. But I think 2016 is really when all the forces have coalesced to make the Latino vote a decisive vote. And so we're looking forward to seeing greater numbers than what is predicted. I know you mentioned 13.1. We wish it were more. And so
that's the floor.
Yeah, that's the floor, exactly. So in that sense, we really support the work that is being done through NHLA. We definitely support, as an organization, the work that is done by sister organizations like LULAC, NALEO. I mean, it's great work, and rather than duplicate, we oftentimes support each other so that we can be more strategic in our efforts as we move forward.
Muchas gracias, Kenneth. And I'm getting text from my dear, fantastic colleague, Monica Ramirez, because I forgot to mention all of her social media. And I want to recognize Monica Ramirez. She's the person behind putting all of it. It was very hard to find spaces over here in Cleveland and to do a lot of things that Monica found through her own contacts and everything, ways to make this happen. So thank you for all of your work, Monica, in being part of the team, and also Michael Torra, that is sending the press release right now as we talk. So all the Twitter handles are at NALEO, at NHCSL, at LULAC, at NHLA, NHLA, okay, NHL Agenda, and mine is at Gesanchip and at LACLA. Thank you for, I'm gonna become better at doing this social media thing. Brent, just to continue, I think, as you know, we've been collaborating and being partners for a long time with a fantastic organization that is LULAC, an organization that has an army of volunteers all over the nation, 1,000 consuls. But from the perspective of doing civic participation, I think on the ground, on the front line, if there is somebody that understands what it takes to do one voter registration, what it takes to be on the supermercados, on the tienditas, on the different spaces to engage your community, and how beautiful it is to do that work, how powerful it is when our communities engage. You talk a little bit about your work on the civic participation effort, the collaborations, and where we are from the strategic point of view.
Yeah, I think the great story of this election season, and I think of the future as well, is just how closely the Latino organizations have come together to create the National Latino Civic Engagement Table, to coordinate our strategies around the country, to partner together, because we realize that it's not about who gets credit for registering the voters, it's just a matter of making sure that the voters get registered. And we believe, if you heard earlier our discussion of the policy agenda, that the success or failure of that agenda to get enacted in large part depends upon the turnout of Latino voters in this election, but also in future elections as well. The good news is, if you heard both Kenneth and Arturo talk, the demographic trend is very favorable. It's pretty dramatic to think about the fact that 9 million something voters in 2008, and we're expecting at least 13 million just 8 years later. That's a huge increase by itself. And then if you think about the fact that what Kenneth was talking about, from going from 1 in 50 Americans now to by 2030, was it
2050?
2050, 1 in 3. That's pretty amazing as well. So the truth is, if we just sat back and did nothing, the Latino vote is going to become an increasingly important force in our nation's democracy, regardless of what of our actions. But the fact is that we're working very hard overtime to make sure that this demographic reality kind of hits a little bit faster than slower. And so we're all pushing in that direction because we understand how important it is to engage the Latino vote. And for LULAC, this actually started right from the very beginning of our organization 87 years ago. Back then, we still had the Jim Crow laws in place. I've got a sign in my office that says "Pay your poll tax" with the LULAC logo on it, because that's what we had to face back then. They actually taxed voters in order to be able to stop them from going to the polls. So we've been fighting, a kind of voter suppression efforts for a long time. But the real focus for us is to make sure that our folks are engaged and getting them to register to vote, getting them to turn out to vote. As Arturo was mentioning, this great kind of disengaged, trying to get that great disengaged to engage and realize that their vote really has a huge impact on the quality of life for their families, and that it's important to be part of our democracy. And so together, what we've done is worked across the country. We've actually got a map of 26 different states in which our organizations are collectively engaged in registering Latino voters. And we've got some campaigns that are completely voluntary in terms of members of LULAC and Aleo and the other membership organizations kind of going to the tiendas and the different stores and registering folks to vote. In some places we've been able to get canvassers and actually go door to door and register voters that way. But we're also using social media, as Hector just mentioned, as well as PSAs to promote the need to vote. And to use celebrities like with Voto Latino to really engage. Folks like Jennifer Lopez have 37 million Twitter followers and Facebook followers, and by having them weigh in here and encouraging Latinos to vote, that really has a big impact on our community as well, because they can really get to the folks who are part of that disengaged community that really have to get to turn out. So some of the strategies that we've used this year. One of the things that we've really started looking at is, there is a focus, as Arturo mentioned, unfortunately, by the campaigns on just the battleground states. The Floridas and the Ohios, and the states that are in play, Virginia, Nevada, quite a few others. But then the other states tend not to get a lot of attention when it comes to voter engagement. And as a result, there's a lot of folks that probably could be reached and encouraged to vote that don't turn out to vote. So early on in this selection process, LULAC and our partners worked to try to engage Latino voters in Iowa to get involved in the Iowa caucuses. We looked at the last election cycle, and only 1,000 Latinos participated in the caucuses. And we had a goal of trying to get to 10,000 Latino voters in the caucuses. Now, that doesn't seem like a big number when you compare to 13.1 million, but in the caucuses, there's only about 20,000 people to vote. So actually 10,000 is a pretty big number. I'm sorry, there's only about 100,000 to vote. So getting 10,000 voters out is a pretty big deal. It's 10% of the vote. Going from 1% to 10% of the caucus scores. The caucuses, of course, is a big time commitment. You have to spend at least 2 hours sitting in a room and debating different candidates. And so it's tougher to get people engaged in that process. And a lot of people just don't know what the process is, and so they don't engage. So we went around to Iowa with town halls. We kind of stepped people through the process of doing that. We had PSA campaigns. We had direct mail. And we had a lot of door-to-door, and the end result was we got 13,000 Latinos to turn out in the Iowa caucuses, and that was huge And I think what the message there was that people really took notice, and it wasn't even just necessarily that merely having folks there changed the way people were discussing some of the issues, like immigration reform, for example, that had been a big topic in the primaries there. Suddenly having Latinos in that those caucuses with their neighbors talking about these issues had an impact on how folks were discussing these issues. So that's one of the things that we're focusing on in this campaign is reaching beyond the battleground states, going to the states that perhaps the great disengaged part of our community has been, and ensuring they're registering as well, because we look at this as a long-term goal. It's not about just the next election, it's about engaging Latinos in our democracy and ensuring that they're active regardless of whether they're a battleground state or not. And so that's a big part of the strategy, and we think we actually have a bigger bang for the dollar by doing that, because so many of those states really haven't had a little focus. And so, in the Iowa campaign, we were looking at this. Jeb Bush is a good friend of mine, but the amount that he spent per voter and the amount that we spent per voter was about 100 to 1 difference in terms of the turnout. So we were really very efficient, and I think that was because nobody had actually reached out to the Latino community in Iowa before and tried to get them to turn out to vote. So we're going to be looking for those opportunities throughout this campaign, and I think that's why with the National Latino Civic Engagement Table, you've seen such a large number of states that we're actually focused on, way beyond the battleground states, to include states like California and Texas and many other heavily Latino states that often don't get the attention of the battleground states. Finally, I just wanted to say that we've had a lot of help as well with the partners. AT&T is here represented. They've agreed to run PSAs, just nonpartisan PSAs, encouraging Latinos to turn out to vote, encouraging everyone, all Americans, to turn out to vote. That's a really important thing for all of us to do, because if our citizens engage in this democracy, we're going to have a much better, stronger democracy. In the extent that citizens don't engage in the democracy, I think that we tend to lose out to special interests and moneyed interests who tend to dominate elections because of their influence. Finally, I just wanted to mention that it's working. We were just at our convention last week. Rosie Paris was one of the speakers, and she thought she'd probably catch some of our members, and she asked a room of about 1,500 people, how many are not registered to vote? Who hasn't registered to vote? Who's eligible to vote? And only about 4 or 5 people raised their hand out of 1,500. That's because LULAC members register to vote, and so do all of our friends and advocates. And so part of our strategy is just creating this whole culture of engagement, not just in elections, but just in civic life in general. And so part of the strategy is really expanding Latino engagement in our different organizations and making sure that they really plug in and engage and realize the importance that their influence can have in steering our course. So I think the sign, some may say Latinos are under punching. If you look at the demographic trends, look at the fact that all of us are putting so much effort into registering voters, and then you look at the fact that when we have engaged, how many actually turn out and vote. The future of our community looks quite bright in terms of having very strong turnouts for years to come, and I think that any candidate that ignores that is really putting themselves at risk.
If I could add just very quickly to the PSA component that Brent was mentioning, I really have to recognize the work that many of the Hispanic networks are doing, like Univision, Telemundo, HITN, in trying not only to get our community to go out and vote, which is obviously the most important thing, but also to know why they're voting and to educate them on the issues that are important to our community so that they know exactly what they're doing when they go and cast that ballot. And so that's very important work. Is we need a participatory electorate within our community, but we also want them to be as educated as possible on those issues that are crucial to us for the next decades.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, Kenneth, and thank you, Brent, Roger Rocha, also the president of LULAC, for all the fantastic collaborations that we've been able to put together on civic participation. I also want to recognize Stephen Isley from Han Lauser firm. Thank you for opening your doors to have this event. We really, really appreciate it. As I mentioned before, it was very hard to find spaces, and we thank you for opening your doors.
Glad to do so.
Thanks. It's almost the end of our event. We have time for 1 or 2 questions for fantastic leaders. If anybody has, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Randy Villegas. I'm from South Kern, Seoul. And coming from the Central Valley, we have a massive amount of undocumented immigrants who are an essential part of our agricultural workforce and are vital to our local economy in many industries. Unfortunately, however, many of these undocumented immigrants have virtually no access to health care. How does the NHLA's agenda address this issue to ensure that any person, regardless of documentation, has access to healthcare?
Dr. Rios here to do a presentation on healthcare, but if you want to go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, so I'll say that we created a campaign called Latinos United for Healthcare, working to try to work with the effort to pass the Affordable Care Act in Congress, and to ensure that the Latino priorities areas within healthcare were included. Big fight was what you just mentioned, which was whether or not undocumented immigrants would be allowed to be part of the exchanges and be able to purchase health insurance through the exchanges. We lost that battle. I have to be honest with you. We don't win every time. You know, this is real. You don't always win on your policy priorities. But we were successful in getting additional funding for the community health clinics around the country. So in your neighborhood, there should be some health clinics that do provide services to people based upon their ability to pay. And so if they don't have any income or very low income, they should get a sliding schedule of fees and be able to pay less for that. So that was the compromise that we were able to finally work out with the administrations to get this additional funding for the community health clinics to ensure that they could help fill the gap that was going to be left by the fact that undocumented immigrants couldn't actually purchase through the Affordable Care Act these in health insurance through the exchanges. Now, currently, we're focused on an effort to try to revisit this issue and pushing to try and ensure that that mixed status families will have access to health care. I think our goal is to make sure that, you know, if you've got U.S. citizen children within the family or legal resident children within the family, you should still be able to benefit from the Affordable Care Act. And so we're currently working to push that through. It's a tough legislative session, as you probably are aware, only because of the shortened time frame with the elections approaching. But certainly one good thing is that some of the candidates that have been running have endorsed our suggestion on this area, and you know, certainly if they win, we expect them to be able to make good on their commitments to our community.
And I have just one more question. Again, coming from Kern, we have law enforcement agencies that directly violate the Trust Act in California, which ensures that undocumented immigrants would not be deported for any nonviolent crimes or minor infractions. But in Kern County, the Sheriff's Department directly works with ICE to detain immigrants for minor infractions that directly violates the Trust Act. How can we hold agencies like this and agencies like Sheriff Joe Perio from Arizona accountable for their actions against the undocumented community? Is there anything you can do? Or
Well, I can talk about the whole policy of not only deportation, but this anti-immigrant pieces of legislation and all the obsession with enforcement and how it affects the quality of life for families. We've been very, very vocal about all of these policies from the perspective of racial profiling, the impact that it has on our communities, the impact that it has on dividing our families, the impact, the long-term impact. A lot of people don't really analyze the impact that all of these policies have in the well-being of our families from the economic perspective, from an employment, the quality of our schools. So it really affects all the issues that we talk about in our public policy agenda, and that's why the issue you're bringing, the issue of immigration reform, is so important and is so central. Different organizations in these spaces have been doing a lot of work directly with the issue. You mentioned Sheriff Arpaio. I think I just ran into him on the street. Those kind of policies we strongly oppose. Roger, you are raising your hand if you want to.
Roger Rocha, LULAC National President. Very simple. A lot of these agencies work under the 287G program, if you're familiar with that.
no.
Which, are you?
Could you explain it? Just
287G program allows local government agencies, Sheriff's Department, police departments, to work through a federal program to detain immigrants. It's a federal program. It's there. How do you combat that? Very simple. You talk to your Congress and the legislators to get rid of it. That's the bottom line. How do you get rid of people like Sheriff Arpaio and other people like that? You organize and you vote them out of office. I mean, that's the bottom line. That's what you got to do. But meanwhile, there's a federal program and it's legal, any agency can go ahead and apply for this. A lot of them don't. A lot of them say, hey, we're not trained to be, immigration enforcement officials. But the best way for you to do it in your community, organize, and vote them out.
thank you.
Thank you for the questions. We have time for one more question. We start with a full room with a lot of press, and that's good that we're at the end of this session. It was a little bit long, but we really needed to cover all these different issues here at the comp. Go ahead.
Hi, Tara Sorensen with PBS to the Contrary. My question is mostly for Kenneth, but anyone else can answer it. I was at a program called Running Start yesterday to talk about young women in politics and how to encourage them to run for office. And one of the things they said was that it's not that women are less likely to lose an election, it's that they're just not going out and running for an office. Do you guys find these same statistics within the Latino community where that they could win just as easily as a constituent, except the fact they're just not running? Do you see this in your community as well?
I mean, definitely. If there is an underrepresentation of elected officials for Hispanics, if you further break it down to gender, the underrepresentation of Latina women is abysmal. I mean, it's really something that needs to be addressed with an urgent action on our part. And so I can speak regarding our organization. We put together and launched an initiative back in November of last year during our annual summit called Latinas Lead Initiative. And the idea behind that is to have our legislators identify across the board, no matter, irrespective of political affiliation, to identify potential leaders that can run for office, particularly as they move up the pipeline. So we want to make sure that, you know, the Latina senator, say from Maryland, is going to run for Congress, make sure that the person behind, ready to fill those shoes and occupy that seat, is also a Latina woman. So that's something that we're very aware of and needs to be addressed with a sense of urgency.
And I think as a Latina, and I served as an appointee in my community for a little bit, it's also a lack of mentors. It's lack of people that look like us in those positions that can encourage us to take those steps and really talk to us, because there's a lot of questions even for, you know, males about what it entails to be an elected official. So to be able to have people in the community that can guide you and really take you under their wing is lacking in our community for both genders.
Yeah, and that's a key question. I think as a coalition we have a program called Latinas Represent. We actually had an event yesterday, and I'm going to ask my colleague Monica to maybe give us a couple of words on the issue.
Yes, so one of the efforts that we've undertaken as part of the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda's work to promote a reflective democracy is we co-launched a program called Latinas Represent, and its mission is to ensure that Latinas are receiving information that they need in order to run for office and to seek political appointments. What we've found in the work that we've done and in talking to Latinas around the country is that they've told us that they simply don't have the role models, as Laura discussed, that they don't have the knowledge about what the on-ramps are in order to engage in public service. And so part of what we've done through our work is we've created tools and resources to help Latinas know what the process is to run for office and also to seek political appointments. And we've also created a digital action center where we're lifting up Latino leaders across the spectrum of public service. So from individuals who are running NGOs to those who are serving as political appointees, and to Latinas who are serving in elected positions at every level of our government, so that Latinas across the country of all ages can see women who look like them, who are seeking out those opportunities and who are winning. Another chief concern that we've heard from Latinas across the nation is that they are, you know, their concerns around fundraising and how to find support in terms of endorsements and some of those more challenging things that I think confront all candidates. But they certainly are issues that have arisen in our discussions with Latinas around the country. And so part of what we're trying to do through our work is ameliorate some of those concerns and obstacles so that Latinas do start running for office and seeking out those opportunities. And I think we're seeing a change. I think we're seeing more Latinas seeking out those opportunities, and we're excited to continue to engage them in those efforts.
Gracias, Monica. And one of the concerns that we have also from that perspective is the structural challenges that make it harder for Latinas to have access. You can be as qualified or better. You can be a rock star, and unfortunately, the systemic approach that we have seen historically that make it much harder for Latinas. We also advocate to make sure that we change that and that they have equal opportunities to have access to serve in public office. And obviously, we have organizations like Naleo that have done a fantastic job on elected officials, National Hispanic Caucus of Legislator, and others. With that, I want to thank everybody. I see still some friends of the press here in case you want to have one-on-ones. I know Arturo and I need to run to a commitment here to the convention center. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It's very important to go to both conventions and send a strong message of what are the Latino priorities. And for those of you that are going to be at DNC, we invite you. I know there are going to be much more events, and but we invite you to join us over there. Again, thank you for hosting us. Thank you, Monica. Thank you, Michael, and thank you to the rest of the team for helping us put this event together. Muchas gracias.